Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome and welcome back to the Europasaal here on day 2 of the 2023 Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue. I'm really excited for this panel this afternoon. It's called Fossil-Free Heating and Cooling. Is it finally happening? I think this is such a great title, and I think this is going to be a great panel. I'm so excited to welcome my guests here today. I'll give a brief introduction, and then I'll introduce each of you. So the question that we want to address during the panel is, has the time finally come for a rapid and massive restructuring of the heating and cooling supply? Reaching RES deployment targets and climate goals can only be achieved when all sectors are really addressed. How can countries and companies move faster to ditch fossil fuels in heating and cooling? Given the sheer number of heating and cooling systems, which are the most promising pathways for a fast and reliable RES deployment in the heating and cooling sectors, and which technologies are most suited for commercial and industrial sectors? Commercial and industrial sectors is going to be a real focus of what we're doing today. And of course, how can renewable heating and cooling bring a competitive edge to companies? Joining me for this discussion this afternoon, seated just to my left, Maria Zagurolka, the Senior Development and Operations Engineer from Naked Energy Limited in the UK. Irene de Padua, the Policy Director at Bioenergy Europe. Juliana Hinch, Managing Director of the German Association for Concentrated Solar Power in Germany. And Marisol Oropesa, the Secretary for International Affairs at the Mexican National Solar Energy Association and co-founder of the Heat Changers community. Thank you so much for joining me today on this panel. I'd like to start off with an open question to each of you. I'll start with you, Maria. Russia's war against Ukraine and the rising gas prices helped make people aware of the significance of the heat sector and its reliance on fossil fuels. Now, from your perspective, how did that change the situation for the heat market across all sectors, from domestic to industry?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to be surrounded by amazing women on this panel. So indeed, the conflict has been a catalyst for the heat market decarbonization, but at the same time, it largely pushed countries that had the grid that was decarbonized to once again install coal capacity or fossil fuel capacity into it, as well as countries who didn't have any carbon in the grid. Did have carbon in the grid already, push for even more share of carbon and carbon-rich fossil fuels and natural gas into the mix, and which was quite frightening to see, unfortunately. Furthermore, in domestic markets in the UK, there are families who have been pushed to purchase oil, wood burners, to heat their domestic houses and to provide heat for their families, which, brings us back 20, 30 years, 50 years because of that fuel poverty and energy crisis. Furthermore, currently, other families are just affording to heat one room in the whole house and have to use that for the duration of months and months in the winter, which is disturbing and has to be tackled holistically and has to be tackled now. So the heat market is still enormous. And the campaigns of countries to reduce energy demand and educational thought leadership programs that have been centered around educating on decreasing energy demand in households and industrial spaces has had some effect and has had some success, but overwhelmingly they're still far from reaching the goal of decreasing that energy demand. And I think it's important to say how much carbon in that heat market there is. So question to the whole, does anyone know that heat and heat demand occupies around 50% of global energy needs before coming to BATD 2023? Can I have a show of hands? Okay, that is really promising, but unfortunately, it's still a massive number which has to be addressed and decarbonized. And I think the heat market needs a transition from fossil fuels and needs a transition from subsidies for fossil fuels to be able to transition to a sustainable and renewable functioning.
Thank you so much, Maria Zagorolka. Irene de Padua, the same general question for you. from your perspective, how did Russia's war against Ukraine and the rising gas prices change the situation in the heat market?
So thank you so much for the question, and great to be here indeed at the transition dialogue of this year. I think I will echo what Maria said on the fact that heat is half of our energy, and we do often think about energy as electricity, while this is only 1/4 of it. Now it's increasing, of course, but still it's a minority. And I do believe that both the war and the energy crisis, so the increases prices for energy, really brought back the attention and the focus on the energy topics, and in particular on heating. And from our perspective, I'm from Bioenergy Europe, which is the European Bioenergy Association. Actually, the crisis was a bit of a deal breaker because we were afraid that people would go back to more fossil solution, and actually what happened was the opposite. We got a huge increase in the market. A lot of people were turning to more efficient and modern solutions, like pellet, for instance. So we did really see an increase in the demand for locally available, sustainably sourced, and affordable, because that's also a very important point, solutions such as sustainable bioenergy. So we were fearing a much worse outcome from a terrible situation, because both the war and the energy crisis as such are both terrible issues. But we also see some good out of this, which is indeed a push for renewables, not just bioenergy, solar thermal, geothermal, you name it, we have so many different solutions. But I think it's good that the energy discussion is coming back to the table in the political aspect, geopolitical, and also on the reliance of Europe on other countries. And we're based in Brussels, so of course I'm dealing with EU affairs most of the time, and it was good to see also Europe reaction to the war for the Repower Europe plan, so a plan also to push and to support locally available solutions. And if we look at the bioenergy sector, 95% of what is used in Europe comes from Europe. So it's sourced within the EU, and 74% of the manufacturers are also based in Europe, making this really a European industry and a European sector. So this to start the conversation, but maybe I can leave the floor to the other colleagues.
Yes, we'll definitely come back to some of the points you have. Juliana Hinge from the German Association for Concentrated Solar Power. Can you give us a take from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction. I'm really happy to be here to discuss heat. And this is actually a consequence of the terrible war of Russia against the Ukraine, because we start talking about heat. Before, nobody talked about heat. Heat was something that was just there, that was affordable, that was cheap, and it just came out of our heaters. Yeah. And I guess all of you, or most of you, probably didn't know before the energy crisis what the own consumption of energy was. Who did look at the bill exactly? I mean, it was just something we paid and we accepted. And then during last year, we started to look at our consumption, and we looked where we can have efficiency gains. And this is like the private households, and but this also on an industrial level. Industries for the first time actually realized that there is something they have to bother about. And there is a huge amount of energy consumption that they are not aware of. A lot of industries do not know what they consume. They just do not know where the energy comes from and what need they have. Just to give you some examples, I mean, all the boilers of fossils, a lot of them are over-dimensioned. If you now look at them and you want to change the system, first time you have to figure out what is your actual consumption. And I have examples. They would say, oh, it's like 7 tons of steam we need. And then you have a look at the consumption, and you realize it's only 1.5 tons. But it was incredibly overestimated, and nobody had a close look to it. And now we realized that we have to go for efficiency first, and then we have to find new sources. And this is all a process. And unfortunately, we start this process only a few months ago to talk about, to realize what we have to do, to realize what the challenge is, yeah, to change that sector. And now, last year was challenging in a lot of aspects. And yes, it somehow opened the door, the war and the energy crisis, for the technology I'm representing, for other thermal technologies, for the heat transition. But also a lot of capacities went into all different kind of sectors. People were bothering about electricity markets and emergency management. And so, yes, we are heard now with our topic, but there is not a lot of action behind that. Yeah, the market got more informed that the crisis was a door opener, and we get to talk, we get heard, we got on a panel here, and but we need action now. The good thing is that people, the market, is more informed now. If you go to an industry company now, at least they know that what they have to do, or they have an idea of what they have to talk about, but they haven't taken a decision yet. Yeah, so the doors are open, the market is informed, but now we need action. We need to implement, and we get done, and we need to accelerate that, because we do not have a lot of time. Yeah.
This is something that we've heard, over the course of these 2 days. We've had lots of talks. Really, action is what we need, definite steps, and we need to take them now. I'd like to move now to Marisol Oropesa, for the Secretary for International Affairs at the Mexican National Solar Energy Association. Can you give us your perspective, please?
Yeah, thank you. I have the privilege to have lived in Mexico for 25 years. I was born there. And I've been living in Europe for 18 years, so you can do the math. But the good thing is that now I understand both perspectives, like from developing countries, how do they perceive energy? How do they perceive solar energy? How do they perceive the heat topic? And what is the European perspective, for instance? And one of the main takeaways for me from these years, from this late time with the war and the energy crisis, was how much comfort do we have in several places? What's the comfort zone, and how to get out of that comfort zone? And we had to get out of our comfort zone in Europe, in countries like Germany, where we just took for granted what heating is, right? So what I saw in my friendship circle, they were really changing some patterns of consumption. For the first time, they would think, oh, maybe I should wear a sweater instead of putting the heating at 5 or 4. Or others would just consider some energy efficiency measures, which in the communication, there is a lot of information going on. What can you do in order to make your energy use more efficient? Oh, now they say, okay, I heard something about it. So perhaps this action is coming, of course, more from a fear and uncertainty perspective, because we feared, what are we going to do? Are we going to freeze in the winter? Of course, we didn't, at least not in this country. But it was the nature of the action, what it matters to me, because only then the sector got visibility in countries where heating is actually taken for granted. In Mexico, heating is okay, sorry, you're going to freeze maybe? Marisol, what are you doing now in the winter? And I said, well, I might pay a little bit more, and it's a pity because the place I'm living in has no solar heating, for instance. But for them, it was more tangible when the prices of some products and services got a bit higher. So to say, okay, why is this affecting me if that crisis is happening in Europe? So interconnection, global issues, and this is something that it's important for us in the sector to say, where is this motivation coming from? Where is the awareness coming from? And what is our window of opportunity to use that in order to make our services and products more accessible to that need, right? To meet this need, heat demand over 50% in the best cases, sometimes it's higher. So where can we make the highest contribution to the decarbonization, to energy security, to be independent from anything, right? So yeah, I believe the perception is different depending where you see it, from the demand side, from the supply side, but on both sides, the goal is the same. We have the responsibility to take action.
I want to come back to Mexico in a minute, but I'd like to turn now once more to you for our first round of targeted questions. And I said this to all of you before, and I'll say it again now. If someone here on the panel says something that you really want to speak up, I would absolutely encourage you to do so. Maria, you've been active in the field of renewable heat as a developing engineer in the field of PVT. It's a technology that combines solar heat and solar power. And you've been doing it for several years now. How has the narrative around sustainable heating and cooling changed over the last 5 years, for example?
Right, good question. So I will answer this question by telling you a tale about our company, Naked Energy. So in 2015, which is a bit more than 5 years ago, we were just starting to install our first pilot project, which was 10 tubes in one of the largest supermarket chains in the UK, Sainsbury's, which was a success. 3 years after that, we were working very hard to become scalable and roll out our technology to more and more people. So we signed an agreement with a manufacturing partner in Italy, which was a huge step for us. So I'm just talking about transition of solar heat throughout the years. And in that same year, we have installed our medium-scale project, 2018, in Swansea Active Office, which is one of the first and one of the few buildings that generate more electricity and more energy than they consume. And then after that, in 2020, we only went to certify our thermal-only product, and we are only now looking to certify our hybrid PVT product. So since then, since 2020, we are now installing in medium and large-scale installations, and at the present moment, we're installing 400 kilowatt peak capacity at one of the most amazing buildings in London, in the heart of London, which is a huge success for us. So some economists in the room maybe would think, oh, what a general product adoption curve. But I would say that's a story about shift in perspective towards solar heat. The fact that maybe 5 or 8 years ago, it was only available and only perceived as a research scale installation or, just a testing system. Now it's really pushing the boundary of industrial, commercial applications and is more and more rolled out to wider public. So I think that's how the narrative has changed in the past few years.
Thank you so much. I want to come to you next year, but please, I mean, I can ask you and maybe you can build in a response into this question.
Absolutely.
Because I want to ask you about, things on the EU level and how, the relevance of heat in the overall debate on energy needs and energy demand in the EU.
Yeah, I was just about to jump on that, precisely. So
fantastic.
Perfect question. And I think I would like to echo again what Maria said. I think we all agree on this panel. That's an easy conversation, that heat has always been the elephant in the room and that it's only been a recent rediscovery. Before the war, but I think, again, the war and the crisis were a catalyzer in that. But before, even if we look at the legislation, the first version of the Renewable Energy Directive was about renewable electricity. Was not about renewable heat. And it was only in 2018 that we first saw some targets which were indicative for an increase in renewable heat solution. And hopefully, but this is still in the making, we will now have mandatory target for renewable heat, which is a break dealer again, because that's really showing how heat is becoming more and more part of the political conversation and is getting more attention. Still, a lot of people consider heat and energy as electricity. And I'm also a bit sorry to say that heat is being discussed now at the end of the conference in not the biggest room. So that's also why maybe it's not yet got this spotlight that it should have. But I do believe, and I want to be optimistic, that in the future there will be more and more focus on this, more and more support. And I think we'll also touch upon this maybe later on, but less and less support for fossil energy, which is also a key point in this discussion.
Absolutely it is. I'd like to move to Juliana Hinch. Most people associate concentrating solar systems with large power plants in the desert, but this has shifted towards the technology's potential for providing heat for the industry. How does this work?
Yeah, that's right. Most people associate concentrated solar with the power, electricity production, but actually the technology concentrates solar light, and with that generates heat in the first place. And well, in the great power plants, it's then used to generate electricity. But now, since we start talking about heat, since we have the need for renewable heat, our branch, the engineers, started to figure out that we can actually use this heat, the high temperature heat, also for other purposes. Like a parabolic trough or Renewable technology produces temperatures of, let's say, 400, 430 degrees. And this is a perfect temperature that you can use for industrial processes, at a global level. I think it's like 50% of all industrial processes run at that temperature, or the consumption of these processes run up till 400, 500 degrees. So there are a lot of applications where we can use this high temperature, and not only in industry but also in district heating. It's a technology that can be used, especially in existing heating networks that run on higher temperatures. And yeah, you need to store it in thermal storages. So it's a good way to produce high temperature energy. And this not only in the deserts and not only in the most sunny places, but it works also in Central Europe, in the German market, in our neighboring markets. And this is what we are working on now to promote this market and to promote the possibilities, because it's not well known. I mean, it's a technology that is proven, that is there for decades in different applications, but now we're entering the heat market and heading towards the transition.
I want to come back to this in the next round to talk about like some of the things that people don't know about quite yet, but I want to come first to Marisol Oropesa. We've talked a lot about heating here on this side of the globe. Can you tell us a little bit more about solar energy used for heating and cooling in Mexico?
Sure, I can tell you a lot about that, but I'll stick to maximum 2.5 minutes. So Mexico is the largest solar heating market, the second largest solar heating market in Latin America, after Brazil, of course. Brazil is a much larger country with also a very large solar heating and cooling market. We have 4.2 round gigawatt thermal of capacity installed in Mexico. That's the double of the PV distributed generation market. So the solar heating and cooling sector in that specific segment compared to the distributed generation PV is much larger. We have a different situation than we have in Europe. Here, like utility scale is on the rise, right? Both in PV and power. In Mexico is perhaps not that utility scale because we do not have district heating, for instance, so we cannot build that large plants. However, the small decentralized systems are the ones having a lot of success in the market. There are different market niches. You may think, okay, yes, it's just solar water heaters, very simple, very low cost. Of course, yes, it is a huge part of the market, and this is good. Why? Because that's what is needed, actually. We don't need to have very efficient top tech in certain areas because it's no need for that, right? We don't need that much heating in the winter, so a good hot water supply is important because people do not have access to gas all the time, so in remote areas, in rural areas, or people cannot afford gas. So if they get a solar water heater, which is actually cost-effective and easy to install and easy to maintain, they will get it. And they don't think twice. And actually, that's one of the reasons why this solar water heating market in Mexico is growing. It's stable. It has a continuous growth trend. Mm-hmm. However, now it's moving to a more specialized area and to larger applications. For instance, for buildings. As you said, buildings, the topic. How can we heat buildings? And we are not talking about heating buildings. We are talking about supplying hot water to buildings like hospitals, like hotels, like also sports centers, or like even schools and universities where there is a lot of hot water demand for showers, for this cleaning and disinfection, and for so many other different things. And there are a lot of systems being built in these sectors, especially during the pandemic, when I remember when we had that panel about the buildings. In Mexico, there were a lot of hospitals investing in solar water heating systems because they had to increase the number of beds being active because of all the people who had to have treatment. And so they had to expand capacity, and it was very practical and very, financially smart thing to do, just to put some solar water heaters on the roof of the hospitals. And it was amazing for me because it was a time where everything was kind of sad and uncertain, and we had this positive news from the solar heating market. Besides, Mexico, maybe nobody knows it here. Well, yes, I know 2 people know it here. Is leading in solar process heating. And you may think, how come? Well, it's one of the countries where the largest number of installations in the industry is being installed every year. So we have now at least like running and in operation, and we know about them, about 109 systems in operation for solar process heat. And I'm not talking about huge plants. They are small, rather small systems, but that's the base in Mexico. We have a lot of small and medium-sized companies, and they also need solutions for gas, for replacement, for reducing cost. The technology is mostly made in Mexico. We have suppliers. We have, as is in the case in Europe, by the way, Europe is a net exporter in the solar heating sector, which is very important. Well, the same as in Mexico, there are local suppliers with local technologies, different types of local technologies. So there are flat plate collector manufacturers. There are also concentrating collector manufacturers. There are different types of technologies like solar cookers and air collectors and many things. And I'm sure PVT collectors are going to be the next thing. So solar process heating is also still a niche, of course, but in Mexico is working with payback times from 2 to 5 years, which is huge. And why? Yeah, of course, we have a lot of sun, and we have high gas prices. Mexico is oil-producing country, but we import gas. Mm-hmm. So this is perfect for solar process heat applications, and solar cooling, of course.
I want to come back to ask you this is a great overview of what's happening in Mexico. I want to come back to you to think on a more global scale, but I'd like to come first here to Maria Zagorolka. You talked a little bit, the changes from 2015 and the different partners that you've had in the UK, but I want to know a little bit more, how has your pool of clients changed?
Exactly. Coming to our first question of this panel, the crisis in Ukraine and subsequent energy rises throughout Europe and globally, interconnection, has pushed and widened the pool of our clients massively. So if we still have a plethora of research agencies and universities coming for our technology to test PVT applications in all sorts of ways, in dehumidification, seed drying processes, etc. But at the same time, we now have seen clients reaching us from hospitality sectors, so multi-apartment hotels, dwellings, so multi-apartment dwellings as well as university halls. So we are moving to that elephant in the room heating of buildings and not only provision of hot water for those buildings. So that is where our clientele now lies. But at the same time, now we see a shift towards leisure centers coming to us for systems and installations where they see a need to decarbonize their energy in pools, in heating and sanitary hot water, and they come to us to provide that solution, which has good ROI, and also it has subsidies currently, which is a next question to ask possibly, which is great and great to see. And they are, of course, battling the energy crisis and energy pricing rise in UK, but also they are more and more forward-thinking in terms of sustainability and renewability of their heat demand. And lastly, I would like to say that we are yet to enter big industry market, even though we are already applying our technology in food and beverage production companies, which is you might think need a lot of heat for their pasteurization processes, etc. At the same time, we are trying to apply our technology to industrial applications, and that's the next, I think, big challenge for us as a solar thermal market, because industrial applications and industrial specialists, they think that they need humongous amount of temperature for their processes, but in fact, they can get away with mid-range to close to the high range temperatures to successfully achieve their production targets and their manufacturing needs. So I think the final point I want to make is that the clients that we want to see are the clients who understand that solar thermal can be integrated. So if the clients have the stigma about intermittency of solar thermal, we want to see a shift in perspective on solar heat. Solar heat can be integrated with ground source heat pumps. That's a Voldemort word, right? Heat pumps. Oh my God. Sorry. So it can be integrated with heat pumps, ground source, air source heat pumps, and aquifers for energy storage, and can be delivered throughout the shoulder months and winter months. So we are looking for clients to be aware of that, and we are trying to be a thought leader in that perspective, as much as heat changers as well, which I'm really pleased about. So yeah, the clientele has shifted from small research entities to large and super large companies who are looking to decarbonize. And furthermore, we are looking for people to integrate us in other heating devices and technologies.
Thank you very much, Maria. In terms of how things are changing, Irene, I want to come to you as well now. What role does bioenergy play in this current energy crisis? And how do you see this role sort of changing and developing in the long run?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I think the sector coped quite well with the overall energy crisis. Of course, we did see an increase in the price at a certain point, but that was mostly driven by much higher demand, like sales of both appliances and material, like feedstock, both skyrocketed at a certain point, because, as I said, considering gas and electricity prices, still bioenergy was competitive and much more affordable, so people did turn to that. So throughout, we see that the sector coped quite well with the crisis. Of course, the market needs some adjustment in the beginning, like everybody else. But again, it's a proven and existing since a long time technology. So I think the market adjusts quite well. In terms of the future, I think that's also quite an interesting question, because we do see still huge potential for growth. If we look at energy in general and heat in particular, still 70% of it, if not more, is using fossil energy. So we do have room for all different solutions and for all different options, also those that are not yet developed or at scale. And we do see as well the possibility of growing in a sustainable way, because that for our sector is a crucial point, is how the biomass is sourced, and is usually done either through its industrial process, so it can be sawmilling residues, or can be forest management residues. So it also brings into the conversation circularity in a way, and reuse of what's already available. So I do believe the future ahead looks bright. There is still a long way to go, though, to phase out fossil energy, and that also will be a game changer for our solutions, so renewable heat ones.
Yeah, absolutely, it will be. You talked about potential, and I want to come now to you, Juliana Hinch, and talk about potential. Namely, you talked about concentrated solar efforts. What's the current state, and more importantly, what's the potential there?
Okay. Yeah, well, the current status is that we are at the very beginning, yeah, and this is a solar process heat, whether it's concentrated solar or if it's flat panels. The process, solar process heat is at the beginning, but with a steep increase, and there are lots and lots of projects in the pipeline to be commissioned this year or next year, or they are in planification. Just yesterday, there were new numbers published by Solar Thermal World. But yeah, we are at a very low level still, yeah, because the market is at the very beginning. But what about the potential? I mean, we've heard it, like half of our energy consumption goes into heat. But only process heat is like, at least in Germany, I think at a global level it's even more. It's only almost equivalent to the consumption we have in electricity. So we actually need to have a new electricity market just to have the numbers. And it's huge. It's almost all based on fossil energy. The potential is enormous, and there are a lot of applications. And there is an enormous potential for concentrated solar, for bioenergy, for heat pumps, for all different kind of technologies, for thermal storages. But we just need to get all these technologies into application, and we need to get them into the market and to work on that, which is not easy at the very beginning, because a lot of people are hoping to have an easy answer. You know, just a fuel switch from gas to whatever, might be hydrogen, but it's not. Heat is more complex. You have different levels or different states of heat that you need. You have different levels of temperature. You have temperature, or you have steam that you need. And all the conditions in your industrial surroundings are different. If you have sun, you have access to biomass, or you have access to renewable electricity. So this all conditions your decision, and you also have to look at the individual profiles of the heat consumption you have, because it's not, you actually, talking about solar, there are a lot of industries that have a similar use of energy, like with the solar production. Yeah, if you look at a brewery, there is more production in summer times, because there's also more consumption of beer during summer times, but also all the food industry, they are producing more during summer times. And then concentrated solar goes well with biomass, yeah, because you have the solar during summer month, but you get the biomass afterwards. So the challenge is also to get all the possibilities, all the technologies together, to have to get all the pieces of the puzzle together and work out what your individual solution could look like. And yeah, I'm sorry to say to everyone who was hoping for the easy solution, just to switch one day, this might not be so easy, but look at your processes. There are solutions, there are a lot of technologies available, and this is also something I really want to stress. There are technologies available in the market, available, scalable, and they are already affordable, and they just need to be used. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Marisol. I saw you picked up your microphone, and I'm not sure. I have a question for you, but if you want to respond, if you picked it up at that specific moment, I want to give you a chance to respond.
Yeah, now when we are talking about process heat, I agree with Maria that we know a lot of the potential in process heating is actually below 150 Celsius. And from the examples I gave you in Mexico, well, what I told you, Mexico has a huge process heating market, solar process heating market. It's for the food and beverage, actually, most of the part. And it's for cleaning, disinfection, boiling, pasteurizing, drying. So like very simple processes. So sometimes I wonder, why do we need to get so complicated? Why don't we just first satisfy that demand, which is huge? Like in the industrial sector, 74% of the energy demand is for heating. 74%. So we can like beat the below 150 Celsius area, and we can even go beyond with concentrating power, solar thermal power. So the potential, I think we shouldn't talk about potential. We should talk about investments. Why companies do take so long to make the investment decision? Because it's within their hands to make that decision. Here we are not talking about, the grid, or, the infrastructure, or, the legislation. No, come on, this is something like the decision makers, the CEOs, the CFOs can make. Like, I want now to spend less, and I want to be more competitive, and I want to have high tech in my plant. That was my comment.
Thank you very much for that comment. What I want to do now, because Maria, you brought it up just a moment ago, and so I want to take the opportunity because you talked about subsidies. And I have a question that I'd like to ask to each of our panelists about subsidies. In what way do subsidies influence decarbonization of this heating sector? And the second part of this, what role does the support through subsidies for fossil fuels play when it comes, and we're talking about funding, what role do subsidies play when it comes trying to decarbonize heating? Maria, since you introduced this topic, please, I'd like to hear from you first.
Sure, thank you. Well, I think some governments, can only speak for some governments send real mixed messaging towards the public sector and private sector, where they introduce carbon taxing, huge pricing on carbon, but at the same time subsidize fossil fuels, which is interesting and is generally seen as interesting strategy. But I think subsidies play a huge role in helping the technology roll out, helping the scalability of the technology that we are talking about today. And I think I also think that subsidies help sectors which could not think about implementing renewable technologies because of high capital cost or maybe operational cost, depending on which technology you're talking about, enter that technology and enter the negotiation in purchasing one. So I think it's very important. And of course, it sends a message towards the society that, okay, we are subsidizing solar heat, we are subsidizing concentrated solar, we are subsidizing biomass. We are supportive of your transition. We are supportive of your renewable energy thinking. And I think it's really important for governments to continue subsidizing renewable energy technologies and implementation of those in commercial markets, in residential markets largely, because once again, general public, I don't think can afford many of the things we are talking today, unfortunately. So I hope that will change. So it's crucial for the governments to continue sending that message to the world and reduce so much the subsidizing of fossil fuels and advertising of that in the future years or in future months, hopefully. Yeah, and currently we are very, very lucky in the UK to have strong support from the sustainable energy associations which work at the local level, coming up to Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, which push the green agenda and provide reports and policies that are both technology agnostic and technology specific, because I think we need to have both. We need to have technology specificity where the public and the commercial sector knows where to go for, what works, what is approved in the geography that we operate in, but also technology agnostic, so everyone and innovative energy solutions have a say in this and have a potential opportunity to go there.
I want to come back to this if we have time in the panel, but I also noticed that one of your fellow panelists wants to respond. Please, Marcel.
Thank you. Besides that, I believe that something that should be part of an incentive program is how to motivate and how to really push installers to do the job, which is making basically the decision for the consumer or for the household, because they are the actual experts. They are going to install it, and usually they are also managers, so they have their business, and they install or recommend what is best for them, what is more profitable for them, what is much easier to install for them, which is not necessarily always what makes more sense, what covers the largest part of the energy consumption with renewable heat or anything else, right? So please, the message to political decision makers and policy makers to consider how to motivate the installers or the energy consultants to really think of what is best in terms of renewable heating and cooling.
Juliana Hinch, I'd love to get your take here, please.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I wanted to refer to what Maria said. I absolutely agree what you said, especially the part where you say it gives signs to the market, subsidies give signs to the market that there are technologies that are worth investing in. I just want to add something. We also have to consider that we definitely rely on innovations and new technologies. Like 2 years ago, the International Energy Agency published a report, and they're saying to do or to meet the climate targets or the technologies that we need, 50% of them are still not commercial. So what we need is to get new technologies, get innovations into the market. And I know at least in Germany, and I think also in Europe, there is good investment in R&D. Many governments are giving money, and that's good. There are a lot of innovations, but we need to get these innovations into the market. And this is really difficult, and this is me talking for concentrated solar. We are, entering the market, and I'm also speaking for solar thermal storages. Yeah, also these are a technology that's entering the market, and it's really difficult because of regulation, incentives that are given only to specific technologies. So we need to have subsidies or regulation that is open, that leaves space and room for innovations, and not fixed on certain characteristics of a technology, but referring to our target, to our climate target. Yeah, this is something, maybe you can refer to CO2 emission reduction or something like that. Unfortunately, many systems are still focused on technology.
Mm-hmm. I see you nodding, Irene Di Padua. Please, jump in here.
Yes, so, I have the privilege of being the last one, so I already can agree with most of what was said. We are doing a bit of a different perspective because bioenergy do represent 60% of the renewables at the moment, 12% of Europe energy consumption, so we are not entering the market, which puts us in a very different position considering what we just said. But still, the fact that fossil fuels are getting more subsidies per unit of energy produced than other renewables, that's for me striking, and that should be the first thing. And I do agree a lot on the point that we need subsidies for innovation, and also because indeed if we look at the market, we do have bigger players, but we do also have smaller players, SMEs, which are maybe struggling to get the capital investment that is needed in the beginning to decarbonize. And going back to the industry, I also think that what was said is true, that we do have different options depending on temperature level and conditions, but the subsidies are there again and incentives and a political message to make sure that industries are willing to decarbonize and take concrete steps towards that. So I do believe that indeed on top of subsidies, we need other incentives, we need regulation as well, and it's, let's say, the full package of measures that also will be needed.
You bring up incentives, and we're nearing the end of our panel, so now I want to say this is a chance for us to wrap up, and I want to hear from each of you, in terms of incentives, and in terms of policy incentives. If you had one wish for a policy that could be implemented to this afternoon or tomorrow morning, what one policy would you want to see implemented the most? Maria, you get to go first because you're seated to my left.
Well, one is really hard.
I'm
a big believer in 3, a magical number. But I'll go with one. I think if I had a magic wand and would implement any policy that could be effective, because we have a lot of policies that struggle to make it to actionability and implementation. So I think policy regarding thought leadership and training for people in the industry. I think availability of resources for people trying to start decarbonization of heating and cooling. So policy regarding free education, educational courses and training for installers, for people who are young professionals trying to get into renewables and technology there would be key for future generations to really get into that sector and modernize it, innovate it, implement things that they see working in their laboratories and universities, etc. I'm talking about young professionals here. But yeah, policy regarding education and availability of thought leadership on the topic would be great. Oh.
Thank you so much, Maria.
Thank you.
That's all right. It's been a long few days for the stage. Irene Di Padua, your one wish for policy implementation.
If I had to pick only one, I would say ban fossil fuels. So a clear exit strategy from fossil energy, a ban on the subsidies, and a gradual phase out, because of course we know this will not happen one day from the other. We will need a transition period and adaptation. But still, I think a very clear signal will be to stop completely the subsidies. That will be a very first and important step.
I think you're right. Thank you very much, Irene de Padua. Juliana Hinch, your one wish for policy that we can implement tomorrow.
Okay, I can include their wishes as well. So, no, my wish would go in the communication communication. We need to have a stronger focus on heat. We need to develop strategies for the heat market. I hope that during this year, next year, a lot of governments have heat strategies. So next year we will see a lot of ministers sitting on this panel talking about their strategies and then communicating the necessity of doing something in the heat transition into the market. And with that, with the communication also on all institutional levels, they should work on heat. They should generate the knowledge and spread that into the market, because this is really something that is lacking at the moment. Knowledge, what could be a good option, and everyone is still a bit confused. We need some guidelines, help to choose options, because the options are there. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Marisol Oropesa, close us out. Your one wish.
The fourth component of our new incentive program would be a grant system that makes sense, and sense in the sense of that is goal-oriented. And what's our goal? To decarbonize everything, whatever. Everything needs to be decarbonized. So why don't we have incentive programs which get higher in terms of the share which is being covered by renewable energy sources? From the total heat demand or energy demand, what's the share which is covered with renewable energy sources? The higher the share, the higher the incentive, the higher the grant, the higher the support program, because otherwise we are pushing perhaps sometimes in the wrong direction. Like, let's heat pumpize everything. Like, we cannot cover everything with one silver bullet, right? So it makes sense to combine technologies for the purpose of decarbonizing something, right? So if it's a heat pump with a solar thermal system, if it's a heat pump with a biomass boiler, if it's a heat pump with a with a solar thermal for district heating, yeah, let's think of the goal, which is decarbonizing. The higher the share of renewable energy in the whole system, the better, and the shorter the time, because we don't have time, and we don't need to wait for further.
We don't have time. We don't need to wait. Education, communication, banning fossil fuels. My thanks to my four panelists today here. One more time, Maria Zagorulka, for the Senior Development and Operations Engineer at Naked Energy Limited in the UK. Irene de Padua, Policy Director for Bioenergy Europe. Juliana Hinch, Managing Director of the German Association for Concentrated Solar Power. And Marisol Oropesa, the Secretary for International Affairs at the Mexican National Solar Energy. A round of applause for my four panelists today. Also for each other.